I never thought that my humble rainwater harvesting system would ignite an all-out war with the HOA. When they started tapping into my water for their beloved community garden, how was I to know it'd all end with their whole office flooded? The initial drops land on my new barrels with the most wonderful plink. After months of pinching pennies, I had finally acquired a complete system. 5 linked barrels that were meant to sustain my vegetable garden without breaking my water bill. They were meant to see us through our dry seasons. I almost danced as the spring rain began falling. Well, as it should have filled them up. But after 3 storms, something wasn't right. While heavy rain showered down, the barrels remained scantily less than a quarter full. Inching under the deck and following the gutter line, I spotted something that turned my blood boil hot. There had been diversion pipes installed, ones I hadn't approved of. Still on my knees in the mud, a shadow crossed over me. There she was, Miss Reynolds, president of the Pinehurst Village HOA, standing on the border of my property, signature scowl and clipboard at the ready. "Mr. Jackson," she shouted, not even bothering to wait for me to rise, "your garden beds project 6 inches beyond the approved landscaping plan." Wiping mud off my knees, I bypassed the garden beds. "Forget about the beds. Who put these pipes on my gutters?" She gave the pipes a disinterested look. "The association made necessary changes to corner lots. If you'd attended last month's meeting, you'd know we voted to improve water flow." "Improve?" I repeated. "You're stealing my rainwater." "Let's not be dramatic," she huffed, writing something down. "Bylaw 72.3 states that all excess precipitation funds go to community areas. Your system was never approved by the architectural committee to begin with." 2 maintenance workers emerged behind her in full HOA regalia, nodding like this all made perfect sense. "I never consented to all of this," I snapped, following her along my property border. The irrigation system was elaborate. Small hidden culverts led to bigger pipes that disappeared under the ground. "Majority rules, Mr. Jackson," she said. "The community garden requires consistent irrigation." That lawn, I recalled it vividly. A photograph-worthy show right behind the HOA office. I had very deliberately refused to pay the additional dues to underwrite it, and yet there it was, green and vibrant, probably nourished with water pilfered from me. My blood pressure spiked. "You're raising our dues while tapping water from my land?" I tried to remain calm, but my tone increased. Miss Reynolds stopped and turned, frosty stare fixed on me. "Watch yourself. You're already accumulating infractions this quarter." They walked away, and I trailed after them along the underground pipes to where they led. The beautiful garden, which just so happened to advantage board members' properties, including Ms. Reynolds' immaculate colonial, with its lovely view. At home, I phoned the City Water Authority. "Rainwater rights are unclear and primarily governed by HOA contracts," they said. I'd have to research mine. That giant binder likely stashing bylaw 72.3. Leafing through pages, a knock on the door. At it, a vivid yellow violation notice and a $300 fine for unauthorized landscaping and combative behavior toward HOA representatives. That evening's sleep didn't have a chance. I saw the sprinklers turn on in the neighborhood garden, uselessly spraying in all directions after the rain of the day. My rain, stolen rain. And then my phone vibrated, a text from Marcus, the neighbor. "Saw Reynolds at your house. You okay?" I responded with, "They're stealing my rainwater for their garden." His response came quickly. "Not only yours. Come by tomorrow. Bring your HOA contract." The next morning, Marcus's dining table disappeared under a tidal wave of documents. Property maps, water drainage plans, HOA bylaws. He'd fought with them last year over solar panels. Reading one page, he gestured. "Right here. Section 72.3, added last year, but they never provided proper notice. Technically, it's not binding." "Can we challenge this?" I asked. "Alone?" "Tough," he said. "But I've already been talking to other neighbors." Eleanor, who lives just down the street, is a retired hydraulic engineer, and apparently she's been quietly documenting the board's shady behavior for years. That afternoon, her cozy kitchen transformed into our war room. At 72, she had a fire in her eyes as she spread a maze of diagrams across the table. They're not just siphoning your water, she said, gesturing to a map of the neighborhood etched with red and blue lines. They've created a whole underground system. 6 houses are being tapped to irrigate their gardens, and that ridiculous decorative pond. Marcus stabbed his finger at another section. And see who profits the most, each and every board member. Their properties all face the best views and have accesses. Eleanor nodded her head, serene and confident. That's the best thing about water. When their system breaks down, it'll just appear to be reverting back to its natural path, nature being nature. Like clockwork, a message beeped from my weather app. The biggest storm system in a half-decade was heading our way, expected to arrive this weekend. Fortuitously, the HOA had planned their annual garden tour for Sunday afternoon. I glanced between Eleanor and Marcus, a plan rapidly taking shape. What would these modifications entail precisely? Eleanor's smile grew wider as she took a new sheet of paper, drawing pipe connections and flow redirects with ease that even I could comprehend. Control was back in my hands for the first time since the theft had been uncovered. That evening, still another notice of violation arrived on my doorstep. This one said my rain barrels were inconsistent with neighborhood aesthetic standards. The penalty? Doubled to $600 now. I carefully put it in the file with the others, a peculiar sense of calm creeping over me. Ms. Reynolds had no concept of what was coming her way. Friday evening rolled in with dark clouds, and with them, my preparation. I lugged supplies into the garage, Eleanor's specially designed pipe sections and her detailed instructions in hand. Marcus assisted me in organizing, while his teenage son stood guard at the front window. 6-hour window in the storm, Marcus reminded me, checking items off our checklist. Make sure you've got full waterproof gear. A car drove slowly by my house, and we all stood stock still. After it passed on, I grumbled, "She's been driving around the block. Reynolds knows something's up." "Of course she does," Eleanor said, materializing beside us with her diagrams newly laminated, safe from the impending deluge. "That's why we're proceeding with Phase 2. Phase 2 was Marcus's idea, documentation. His daughter Zoe, a journalism major, had helped compile a damning report detailing the HOA's dirty laundry, water theft, selective rule enforcement, and shady landscaping contracts repeatedly awarded to Miss Reynolds' brother-in-law's company. "We'll distribute it at the emergency meeting they're definitely going to call after the storm," Marcus explained, flipping open a thick folder filled with evidence. Eleanor had already submitted formal water rights complaints to the county. But will it be enough? I asked, still skeptical. The board had evaded complaints before. Eleanor's eyes flared. "That's where your neighbor Diane comes in." She worked for the local news station, Diane. Unobtrusively, she'd been documenting the HOA's secret water diversion system for months. She already had a news van lined up to happen upon storm damage on our street Sunday afternoon. The scheme was foolproof, but it all depended on my contribution, physically manipulating the diversion system at the worst point in the storm, when visibility would be poorest. Rain began falling just as we were finishing up final preparations. The revised forecast estimated more than 4 inches, more than it would take to swamp the storm drains under ordinary circumstances. With our modifications in position, that water would do what water likes to do best: go straight down to the HOA office by following gravity. "Remember," Eleanor told me as they left, "you're not constructing something new. You're only removing their man-made diversion and allowing nature to reclaim what's hers." That evening, I slept very little. I stayed in bed listening as the rain grew heavier hour by hour. At 3 a.m., it was pouring. I dressed up, waterproof coveralls, rain boots, a rain jacket, and my waterproof headlamp. Holding Eleanor's toolkit, I crept out the back door. The storm shrouded everything. The yard was briefly illuminated by bursts of lightning in fractions of seconds, while the thunder drowned the sound of my footsteps. I headed to the main junction Eleanor had pinpointed, the intersection of diversions from 6 houses before they fed into the community garden's irrigation. My hands trembled while working, swapping the directional valve for Eleanor's modified one. It appeared identical, but when subjected to extreme pressure, it would weaken gradually, diverting flow back to its original downhill route. Another 3 junctions required the same modification. Water was already circulating around my ankles when I came to the final connection, close to the boundary of my land. Then out of nowhere, headlights. I ended the lamp's life and squeezed myself flat among a patch of bushes. Ms. Reynolds' SUV cruised along slowly, her wipers struggling with the torrent. Storm or no, she was on neighborhood rounds today. As she moved on beyond me, I was into full speed, closing out the final hookup and speeding back to my garage, racing with adrenaline. At dawn, the storm came full blast. I stood in my front window and observed water flowing just as Eleanor had forecasted. No longer diverted to the community. At the front stood Ms. Reynolds, damp hair, stiff posture, clinging to what little composure she'd left. This emergency session concerns the disastrous flooding of association property, she started, voice strained with hardly suppressed anger. Our initial inspection reveals willful sabotage of the water control system. Her eyes swept across the assembly, then came to rest on me. Certain members who were recently cited for violations of rules might be accountable for this act of sabotage. A murmur of reaction went through the room. I remained impassive. This, she went on, was obviously a deliberate attack. She gestured to a table heaped with wet paperwork. Our insurance policy calls for a police report on any claim of vandalism, she stated firmly. Her finger gestured in my direction, just as she was about to call names, when Eleanor quietly stood up from the front row. Actually, Ms. Reynolds, she said, voice carrying clearly across the room, I've brought some evidence that I think everyone here might find enlightening. It's now or never, Marcus whispered as we crouched beneath the lip of his garage. Rain pounded the concrete like swarms of tiny missiles, gouging streams along every curb. The conditions were absolutely perfect. I cinched the hood on my raincoat and nodded curtly. Eleanor's valves are set to go, Marcus said, tapping the water-resistant bag he had over his shoulder. 6 redirector replacements and the master control switch. Gravity takes care of the rest after everything's set up. My heart pounded like a drum in battle as we crept along, slipping between properties as the storm helped conceal us. The first diversion pipe, located behind my azalea bushes, came into sight. Marcus went down on one knee at once, hands flying quickly but accurately in the face of the deluge around us. He took out the HOA's contraband valve and installed Eleanor's altered one in its place. Just keep in mind, he called above the storm, we're not creating anything new. We're dismantling their system and allowing the water to go where it rightfully should. House by house, we proceeded from Eleanor's painstakingly diagrammed map. Mrs. Jameson's was the most problematic. The HOA had put their installation underneath her prized rose garden. Lightning crashed overhead as we carefully steered around every bloom, being particularly careful not to disturb her precious plants. Last one, Marcus replied, hunched down at house 6. After I flip this master switch, everything redirects back to natural flow. I was stuck. What if we get caught? Marcus raised an eyebrow. You want your rainwater or not? His fingers wrapped around the switch. It clicked softly open. Now, I said, we wait. I didn't sleep much. My head whirled at the vision of water running, collecting, taking back its natural downhill course to the bottom of Pinehurst Village, the HOA office. Come morning, the storm had come and gone, and sunlight filtered across the wet neighborhood. I poked my head out behind the blinds. A group of neighbors had already congregated on the street down the way, pointing and muttering with excited chatter. I took my coffee and strolled over in a nonchalant manner. Never seen anything like this, said Tom, 2 doors down, pointing ahead. The HOA office was right in the middle of a rising tide of water, ankle deep and rising higher. Water encircled the single-story building like a moat, and right next to it, the formerly manicured community garden, the one our pilfered water had been keeping so lush, was now a swampy disaster. A black SUV braked hard on the lip of the mess. Ms. Reynolds got out, her designer boots splashing as she strode towards the office, until the puddle engulfed her ankles. She screamed once, echoing over the flooded lawn. "Someone call emergency services!" she yelled. "This is criminal! Vandalism! Destruction of property!" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Looks like a drainage issue to me," I said bluntly. Perhaps someone should have hired a trained engineer before redirecting the entire water system of the neighborhood. Her gaze fastened on mine, narrowed, enraged. You! This is your fault. Before I could respond, Eleanor moved up to stand beside me, calmly holding up her phone camera. Just documenting the flood for the association's official records, she said, voice sugar sweet. Oh, and I've invited Channel 5 News. They're covering water rights violations in suburban developments. Ms. Reynolds paled. You wouldn't dare. The county water authority took a special interest in my call this morning. Eleanor continued, scrolling through her phone. They were particularly curious about the unapproved water diversions impacting multiple private properties. Right on cue, a news van rolled up behind us. A reporter and cameraman jumped out, quickly setting up their gear. Ms. Reynolds, heels splashing, turned on her heel and marched back to her SUV. Emergency HOA meeting, she shouted. Today's emergency session will be discussing recent flooding of association property and necessary emergency repairs. And who's covering that expense? Someone called from the rear. Our insurance will... Was our office even built in a flood zone to begin with? Someone interrupted from the crowd. Ms. Reynolds fidgeted with her pearl necklace, obviously shaken. The natural drainage patterns, which you modified. Eleanor stood up from her seat. The room became silent once more. I've brought evidence that might interest the room, she went on defiantly. This isn't the time, Ms. Reynolds started. Show us! Several voices cried out together. Eleanor stepped forward and started spreading out big property maps on the middle table. These are the original county-approved drainage plans for Pinterest Village. 15 years ago, she said. Then she placed a clear overlay on top. And these are the unauthorized changes done by the present HOA board over the last 3 years. Gasps erupted around the room. Murmurs ensued. The HOA has systematically redirected stormwater from 6 private properties, Eleanor said, pointing to houses, including mine, on the map, all in order to maintain an ornamental pond and a garden scheme that wasn't ever properly approved. That's ridiculous, Ms. Reynolds snapped. We've been enhancing the visual beauty of the neighborhood. At the expense of stolen water, I said, joining Eleanor's side. Water you fined me for legally collecting and then redirected behind my back. And mine, added Mrs. Jameson, slowly rising with the support of her cane. My garden dried up. My water bill tripled. Toward the back, the Channel 5 reporter scribbled rapidly in a notepad. Marcus stepped forward next, holding a thick folder. In addition, I've reviewed the HOA's financial records. They show $2,700 of our dues went into building this illegal system. That was the final spark. The crowd erupted, yelling, accusing, demanding answers. Raising my voice, I cut through the din. What occurred during the storm wasn't sabotage. It was the natural course of water taking over when their illegal setup failed. You sabotaged our infrastructure, Ms. Reynolds snarled, pointing at me once more. That's vandalism, criminal. At last, the HOA's lawyer, who had been stone-faced until this point, leaned in and whispered something hastily to her. Her rage visibly faltered, eyes flicking. We might have worked without the proper permits, she acknowledged begrudgingly. Might have. Eleanor elevated one eyebrow and pushed a formal letter across the table. The County Water Authority doesn't think so. They formally opened an investigation. The room erupted into frenzied shouting again. Over the heads and shouting, I met Marcus's eyes. He nodded slightly, acknowledgingly. It wasn't over. Not yet. A journalist pushed through the burgeoning crowd and approached me. Sir, she said, holding a microphone, would you characterize this as part of a larger trend of HOA aggression in your community? I smiled faintly, already visualizing the cut on the news at night. I simply wish to harvest rainwater, I replied. I never dreamed I'd expose a flood of corruption. Precisely 48 hours since the storm, the doorbell rang at 7:15 a.m. 2 men in black suits stood on my porch, badges in hand. Mr. Davis, County Water Authority, one of them stated. We have some questions about the recent occurrence at Pinterest Village. My throat dried up. I stepped aside, inviting them in. My hands shook slightly as I poured coffee. Am I being investigated? I asked straight out. The taller one, Hanson, shook his head. You're not the subject of the investigation. We're looking into unpermitted water diversion by the HOA. Your name came up as someone who might know more. Relief hit me like a wave. I've got plenty to tell you. For the remainder of the hour, I led them through it all. My rain barrels mysteriously draining, the warnings and increasing fines, catching the landscaping crew siphoning my barrels, meeting Eleanor and Marcus, and then the storm. Rodriguez, the second interviewer, leaned forward. And the night of the flooding, what happened exactly? I carefully chose my next words. I believe the storm overwhelmed the HOA's unauthorized infrastructure. With their setup compromised, the water simply returned to its original path. The two exchanged glances. We've inspected the site, Hansen said. The valves were altered, intentionally sometime during the night. My pulse quickened. Rodriguez nodded. And the kicker? Those valves shouldn't have existed at all. There's no record of any legal permit for that system. Before they left, they asked for copies of my violation letters and water bills. I relinquished it all. As their vehicle drove away, my phone rang with a text from Marcus. Emergency meeting tonight. Reynolds is going nuclear. The community center was more crowded than the last gathering. Stan. The crowd gasped in shock. Next to me, Marcus stiffened. Before Miss Reynolds was able to proceed, a soft voice rose up from the back. If I may, I'd like to introduce myself. A woman in a streamlined pantsuit moved forward. Diana Fuller, County Assistant District Attorney. My office was sent some pretty illuminating documentation yesterday. Ms. Reynolds' smile faltered. This is a private HOA meeting, she started out, concerning possible criminal behavior, which, Fuller interjected suavely, is why it's my business. She addressed the crowd. My office has gone through extensive evidence of illegal water diversion, HOA fund misappropriation, and falsification of documents, activities conducted by the present board. She placed a heavy folder on the table with a resounding thud. These are official cease and desist directives. As of today, all HOA board activities are halted, and the association's accounts have been frozen until further notice. You can't do that, Reynolds exclaimed. I can, Fuller answered calmly, given the 37 complaints from homeowners who filed with our office. My eyebrows leaped. Eleanor over by the door gave me a smug little wink. In regard to so-called vandalism throughout the storm, Fuller went on, any changes made to an already unlawful installation fall in the category of removal of unauthorized structures. Charges will not be pursued. The room exploded. Cheers and applause and raw celebration. Ms. Reynolds rushed for the microphone. This community is in need of strong leadership. Without this board, property values will decline. Perhaps, said a soothing voice on the side, it is time for new leadership. Eyebrows rose as Mr. Kapor, the retired judge at the far end of my street, stood up. I suggest we have an interim committee to oversee until new elections are held. Hands shot up into the air. Mine did too. You can't just take my position, Miss Reynolds cried, clinging to the podium. Two security officers stepped forward. Ma'am, we've been instructed to secure the HOA office per the DA's orders. As she and the board were escorted out, someone began a slow clap. It caught on quickly, rising into a wave of applause. 3 weeks ago, I opened the front door to the newly renovated HOA office, now transformed into the Pinehurst Community Resource Center. What the flood had destroyed, we rebuilt stronger. A public gathering space, open transparency boards displaying all the lines of the budget, and a new layout inviting to everyone. Eleanor came in first with armloads of ferny potted plants. Sent from the garden committee, they're flourishing now that everyone's contributing right, she beamed. Marcus trailed behind with his laptop in hand. Water consumption fell 30% since we instituted the neighborhood-wide collection system. I smiled as families trickled in, laughing and chatty. Tonight, we'd cast our votes on the new bylaws, ones that valued fairness, sustainability, and real community input. Hard to believe where we began, Marcus said, surveying the packed room. Just then, a black SUV with familiar plates drove into the parking lot. Ms. Reynolds got out. No power suit, no retinue, just jeans and a plain jacket. Trouble, Marcus grunted. We'll see, I said, going outside. She came slowly up to me, extending a check. "It's the refund for your fines," she said, "plus interest." I took it, still not knowing what she was up to. "The DA made me a proposition," she added. "Community service for total cooperation. They've put me to work with the rainwater collection systems." She swallowed her pride, a visible action. "They told you I'm the one you need to speak to." I wasn't above noticing the irony. I might have told her to leave, sent her packing and relished the victory. Instead, I nodded. "The committee meets at 6 on Tuesdays," I said. "Wear boots. We get dirty." Her look of shock. Every bit of aggravation we endured. Our new water-sharing initiative, ours to implement, passed unanimously that evening. I went outside afterwards to see how my first rain barrels were holding up. They sat silently at the end of my driveway, collecting the fading golden light. Simple things indeed, just plastic buckets intended to capture what nature provides unconditionally. Who would have thought they'd be the catalyst to expose corruption and assisted a community to bond together? Down the street, 3 new houses had barrels being placed. On the other side, the garden groaned in glory. Beds of greens, sunflowers, and herbs abuzz with bees and butterflies. Kids laughed and played in the new splash fountain where the water feature was located. A much wiser thing to do with water in our climate. Eleanor caught up with me on the sidewalk as the sun set. "Water's what they always say, though," she stated. "What's that?" "It always floats to the surface. Eventually." She placed a light tap on my shoulder. "That's like justice.